Your Listen Local station, right here on the northern beaches of Sydney. You can find us on your radio dial at 88.7 and 90.3 FM. Can't get to a radio? No worries. You can always stream our program live from anywhere in the world at rnb.org.au. And for listening on your own schedule, our podcasts are available globally at rnbpodcast.com.au. So be sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Now, here is our latest podcast.
Little things, big things grow from little things.
Join Mon and Maz for Grit Diaries, where we share inspiring stories from grit to grace. We hear from incredible people and their stories of resilience, determination, and growth. Everybody has a story. Here is your place to be inspired. Learn how you can look at your own story from new perspectives and be uplifted from new insights. From little things, big things grow.
Oh, welcome to Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7, 90.3. You're here with Mon and Maz on the Grit Diaries from Grit to Grace. Unfortunately, our beautiful Mon is being interviewed herself today. So I am doing this gig solo today, and I am here with none other than the amazing Rod Willis. Welcome, Rod.
Glad to be here.
Oh, we're in for a real treat today. Rod Willis has done many things in his life, but his signature piece has been the band manager for 32 years of Cold Chisel. Now, I think it doesn't matter what age you are, you must have been living under a rock if you don't know the band Cold Chisel. But the man behind getting them to the status that they skyrocketed to is Rod Willis, and it wasn't without his determination, gut, and just sheer drive that got them to the space that they were at. He's actually written a book not that long ago called Ringside, and it's a brilliant memoir and a lot that he unpacks in that book. And so I really appreciate you coming into the studio today, Rod.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Now the story behind our show is from grit to grace. So there's everybody has a story, and we're really looking forward to hearing about what challenges that you had, in the music world, but just in life in general. So, Rod, could we start by going back in time, what life was like? Here we go. So what was life like for you growing up? What was your family life like, and where did you grow up? Was it here on the Northern Beaches, Rod?
I grew up on the Northern Beaches. I lived in DY, down towards South Creek Road there.
Oh, yes.
I went to DY Public School. When it came to going to high school, for some inane reason, I decided that I wanted to be either a farmer or on the land somewhat. And
why a farmer?
You know what? I say in the book that I think it might have come from watching the movie Smiley.
My husband's watched that one. Yep. Okay. Yep. I've seen bits of it.
It's the only thing that I can think of that may have prompted me. So the problem was, living at DY, the only agricultural school was out at Carlingford, which is out Parramatta Way. And
is that Roos? What was it, Roos?
James Roos. I went to James Roos.
Yep.
It's out Parramatta Way. Carlingford, actually, that's where it is.
That's one of the top schools, isn't it?
It is. It was a transitional school at the time when I joined. 2 years prior to coming there, it was what they called, I think they called it a rural school, meaning that I think that was out in those areas. In those days, it was kind of rural,
Yep.
Anyway, it became selective, and my father had a mate who was a politician. This is graft and corruption at the highest. And he was at Coleroy RSL, and he went to him and he said, "Oh, my son wants to go to James Roos, can you get that?" And, is there any way you can help out? And he said, yeah, don't you worry, son, we'll sort that out, Anyway, and his name was Rob Askin, who became the very infamous Premier not long after that. So anyway,
nice.
That's where at that time, then I had to move because my father worked at Channel 7, which was out at Epping. And so it was too difficult for me to get to the school out there at Carlingford from Dee Why.
Would have been a hike.
Oh, yeah.
It's a hike now, but even back then
it would have been a 3-hour journey. So my father and I, we rented an apartment. It was actually a boarding house when I think about it, at West Ryde. And so for 2 years, we would go there during the weekdays, and then on the weekends would come back to Dee Why. And
that was a big commitment on the part of your father to, this is what you wanted to do, and he's allowed you to kind of live that dream, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. And also it was a lot closer for him from West Ryde to Epping. Very.
There was an upside for him too.
Yeah, it was an upside. And at that time, there was also a lot of issues going on with my family at the time. My parents were in the throes of splitting up. So it actually, I think for him, in a way, gave him a bit of a respite from, it wasn't necessarily at the time, and I don't want to go too far into it, but, it wasn't like there was violence or anything like that, but there was that kind of tension that existed. And the other side of it, which of course is always an issue, is that you're trying to hide it, that something's going on, because at that time in our lives, in the 50s sort of thing, it was all, white picket fence and, the cat up the tree, and, it was American television, Leave It to Beaver and all that kind of thing. And there was no such thing that we were watching in any way where people were splitting up. It was basically everybody was happy families, so to speak. So therefore you carried that on in your life with your friends and all that at school and whatever,
And then you grow up later and then you realise you have conversations with your school buddies and you find out, you unpack what was actually happening, and none of us had any idea.
No, exactly. So we eventually moved to McMahon's Point, which is down, Kirribilli there, down there, and it was a lot easier then for me to go to school, and it was a very weird situation. Like, my mother lived upstairs and my father lived downstairs, and it was a 3-storey house, sort of beautiful tenement place overlooking Lavender Bay there.
Nice.
But it was kind of real weird.
Situation.
Really weird, And again, you were always conscious of not making not falling into a trap, but admitting to people that there was something going on.
Off.
Yeah. And my mother had a lover, and he used to live there as well. So there was this there's weird shit going on,
So how old would have you been around this time?
This all started when I was about 12 and was going through to 14, I guess around 14 there. And then eventually we sold that place and moved to Roseville. And my father by that time, I think he was still there for a while, but it was again... the lover ended up buying a farm, so he wasn't around all the time. But, the whole thing was, also had a younger brother and sister, and so I was always trying to cover for them,
So you were big bro.
I was big bro.
You're big bro.
Yeah.
So you had a lot on your shoulders
I
then,
did have
and witness to all of this. You had younger siblings, and just by birth order. Doesn't that impact you, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I...
What was the upshot of that in terms of how you felt that, when you sort of look at, you moved to Roseville, and there were some instrumental things that happened there. How did that sort of background kind of...
Well, I'll tell you that there was a family lived across the road, and they were a bit like there was four boys, and they were always on television. They were a bit like the Bee Gees kind of thing. They were like really, really good musicians and whatever. And they had the family was quite stable. They were quite bohemian. Like they had Palomino horses in the backyard,
in Roseville.
Yeah, in Roseville, and the father used to drive big American Cadillacs and whatever. So they were, and the mother was very had
eclectic?
the black kind of gear on, like, and the blonde hair.
Yeah.
They were quite bohemian. I guess that was kind of the way I put it. But we gravitated to them because there was a stability in their family. You know.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I went through school and. I was the guys across the road, the Hamiltons. Tony, the oldest, he started playing in a band. So it was around that time that it was like still the surf craze sort of thing. So it was the stomp craze, and they had a band called the Stompedes. And anyway,
the
Stompedes, yeah. And they used to play up at the St Ives. Masonic, I think it's,
Masonic
one of those,
clubs?
Something like one of those halls, Masonic halls or something like that. And I used to tag along with them and carry their gear, and carrying a microphone in, so that was like the pre-roadie
beginning of the roadie
kind of thing.
I love it.
And my father, going back, he had a job. He worked as a side job. Which was unbeknown to the television station. He used to work for TV Week doing record roundup. How the hell he got the job? And he went under another pseudonym. He went under a name of Ian Rodney. Ian being my younger brother, Rodney being me, And he used to bring home all these records from and he had like Perry Como, all that kind of shit.
Yes.
He knew he could, Bing Crosby, he was fine, but the Isley Brothers or rock and roll stuff, didn't have a clue. So I used to review the records for him, and so I'm talking around probably at that time would have been 14, maybe even younger, and I guess I was also
in your world.
And the other thing was, the old transistor radio became the big thing, which meant that you could go outside of the house and you could sit outside and listen to the DJs that were. That was the whole sort of thing of when they started with the DJs playing modern music, and so I guess in the end result, that's how I kind of got addicted to it, and then I started hanging out with
these other four lads,
and then in about 64, the Beatles came in 63, I think. I saw the Beatles. I was went to the WAG school, went to the airport to see them, saw them at the stadium,
did I read that you were sort of 7 rows back, like you were right at the front there?
Well, it was row 7, and because my father, being in television, he managed to get tickets for the show. Anyway,
that was the first time that they came to Australia.
That was the first time,
wow.
Yeah. And my sister only found out a year ago that I actually wagged school and was at the airport. She said, I didn't know you did that. And I was like, oh, yeah, I did, Anyway.
Finally confessing.
Yeah, finally confessing.
You figured that you've dodged
I confessed I was actually there at the airport and in Maclay Street when they came out on the balcony. Yes, I remember. Anyway, the Rolling Stones came and that kind of thing,
What did that do for you? What do you remember what you were thinking, and what, I guess, sort of looking at, your passion for music that came into being? What were those moments like for you, watching the Beatles and watching all this?
Well, it was the British invasion as such. And as the time went on, I got more and more obsessed by it, obsessed by music, and I used to go once, when we were living in like Roseville, I get on the train and I go into Wynyard Station, and you could get the music papers from London, the New Music Express, Melody Maker, these famous things. Now, they were always about 2 to 3 weeks late, but it was more the fact of that I could get it at home and I could go through it and look at it and see that you know who was playing at the Marquee Club and all that, and then it became my dream of you know, I wonder if I can ever get there. Yeah, well, it was a dream of, you know, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful? It was the beginning of the swing, what they call the swinging 60s. I was going to clubs at that age in the city, and eventually my mother's lover, or who became the stepfather, he offered me a job. He was a builder as well, and up in Darwin. And so I went away, and that would have been 65. Anyway, I made £550, and I thought to myself, I can either buy a car or I can go to London. And so I asked my parents, I said, look, you know, I want to go to London and see the world, so to speak, you know. So it's funny because I was only going to go for 2 years. I ended up going 11 years. They allowed me to do it. How the hell? I was 18 years of age. Yeah. I jumped on a boat. That's kind of how I started my career. It's funny, just one thing that I will say. My sister said to me just recently, she said that I probably had discounted the fact of the family environment as being also a driving force, as well as going to see, you know, go and see really what was going on, because, you know, we were a world away back in those days.
So far away.
Yeah, I mean, the uniqueness of having the Beatles actually coming here was quite astounding, really. They came before they went to America, you know. You know, I think when I reflect on it, it probably is quite significant as part of what was driving me to go.
What I'm noticing in a lot of the people that we interview, Rod, is that it's, no matter what the circumstances is, there's always those seeds from that young time that actually gave rise to what became something of real interest, a passion later.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, if you look at it, I was going to supposedly be a farmer. Actually, after James Roos, I finished my my wool classing degree. And as I say to people nowadays, the only real job that I ever had, legitimate job that I had, I mean, nowadays a rock manager is actually, you know, looked on as a real job, but you know, was a wool classer. I actually have a degree as a wool classer and actually worked in the wool mills.
There we go, folks. I bet that one he hasn't shared that with anyone.
Yeah.
Yep. Here we go. I'm loving that we're getting these little nuggets, you know, that they don't get on other stations.
Yeah.
Home and Broken Hearted.
Well, this is one of the first songs that endeared me to, or Cold Chisel endeared me, that they were performing in those very early days when I first saw them. And I've always loved the song. I always thought it was a great song. And even today, of course, I've just finished the tour with them, and they're still playing the song now. So
this is one of their early tracks.
It is one of the very early original tracks. When I first got them, they were still playing some cover versions at the time, but you know, this was one that Don had written, and it really stood out as being very, you know, original as such. You know,
Rod Willis, manager of Cold Chisel, 32 years, my gosh, and how, you know, that was really groundbreaking, being in that music industry at the time. And I'm loving hearing, Rod, you know, about those early days and just the kind of the innocence of it and the simplicity. You know, you're here on Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7 and 90.3 on the Mon and Maz show, The Grit Diaries. And so in this part of the show, Rod, we really want to unpack, you know, you headed overseas, 18 years of age, oh my lordy, and you've made your mark overseas. So tell me what that was like for you back in the day, and what was happening over in London.
I ended up in a place called Preston in Lancashire, which is up near Liverpool, actually between Liverpool and Manchester, and cut a long story short, I met a band and they got signed to a record label down in London, and they said to me, do you want to come down and roadie for us? And because I'd been sort of working with them for a while around, we'd been to Hamburg and places like that.
So this is in the 60s.
This is 60, this would be 67, 68, something like that. Yeah.
So this is the Beatles era, this is Floyd, this is...
Yep. And, you know, living in Preston, I was very close to a lot of bands coming up to a place called the Floral Hall in Lytham St Anne's, and I saw, this would have been 1966, I saw the Cream, just when they started, Pink Floyd, Rod Stewart and Steam Packet, and, you know, a lot of these bands that were just starting. I mean, you know.
Magic.
So I said, yeah, look, I'd love to come and work with you guys. So we came down to London, and we were working in London, and I worked with them for about 2-3 years, and then I went with a band called UFO, which became a very big heavy metal band, very you know, loved by bands like Iron Maiden. In fact, when Iron Maiden come before they come on stage, they play Doctor Doctor, which is one of their famous. Metallica loved the UFO. They were one of the kind of heavy metal kind of bands, you know, that were setting that stage for what would come with bands like Iron Maiden and Metallica and that kind of thing, you know. And I work with Fleetwood Mac on tours. I work with Emerson Lake on tours. I even worked with the Byrds when they did the Royal Albert Hall. Did a number of sort of gigs around. And eventually I wanted to go. I hadn't gone to America. We're doing a lot of touring in Europe and whatever. And America was where I really wanted to go. And I got a heads up from a mate of mine, and he said, Savoy Brown are looking for another roadie. Now, Savoy Brown are one of the original British blues bands, and they had been going to America since 67 or something like that, and they were actually quite popular in America. And in fact, they were that popular that they often would tour with bands like ZZ Top, and in fact, south of the Mason-Dixon, ZZ Top would be on top, pardon the pun, and then above the Mason-Dixon line, the northern part of America, Savoy Brown would headline. So they became quite a big band over there.
So just sort of stepping back slightly, Rod, when you said that you really wanted to go to America, is that because you knew that was where music was happening, or was it just something inside you that said, I want to go to America?
No, it was very much like it was the source of rock and roll. Okay. And, you know, that's...
You wanted to be in...
everything that I you know, well, you start to realise that, you know, even with the Beatles, where did half the early songs came? They were cover versions of American music as such. The Rolling Stones based on. So you sort of go to where you think the source is. But in point of fact, I did know well before that. But it was kind of like the fashion was London, and then when you get to England and you're in England and you're you know, you see so much more over there, and then you kind of go, hey, it's America. I've got to go to America. That's where that's the holy grail, so to speak. You know.
Nice. Okay.
So that's why I wanted to go there, and so I went there, and then I basically worked with Savoy Brown. I met a girl in, as the story goes, I met a girl in Canada, and she was pregnant, as the case goes, you know, and I suddenly realised that I really couldn't support a wife and a pregnant wife, and so I decided that I'm going to come back to Australia. Also, at that point of time, I'd built my career up from carrying the microphones and the amplifiers and all that as a roadie. I'd built up to being a tour manager for like Savoy Brown. So I was sort of kind of at that sort of managerial side of things, you know.
Yeah.
So I made a decision that I was going to come back to Australia. Instead of going back and being a roadie or anything, I was going to be into management.
Yeah.
And so after 11 years, I got on a plane and we arrived back. I stayed in Sydney, and luckily enough, my father had an apartment in Cremorne where I could stay, and he also had an office in Walker Street in North Sydney. And so I arrived and I wanted to become a manager, and I started looking around, and my brother told me about this band out of Adelaide, and I said, "What's their name?" And he said, Cold Chisel, and I always remember saying, "What a dreadful name." And I was at a party, and I'd only been in Sydney for about probably two weeks, maybe. I doubt it was even longer than that. And I had too many VBs, I think, and I was sort of espousing about how bad the Australian music scene was. And unbeknownst to me, two of Cold Chisel were actually at the party. And a day later, I got a call from a guy called Don Walker, who was what we now know as the leader of Cold Chisel and the songwriter and keyboard player. And he said to me, are you interested in having a meeting? And I said, okay, fine. I don't think I'd seen them yet. I was trying to work that bit out, whether I'd actually seen them. But anyway, whatever the case may be, I had a meeting with him at the Hilton Hotel, and at that time he pulled out a foolscap page which basically had all the record companies from in Australia and their opinion of Cold Chisel, and which was basically pass, no commercial value, pass, that kind of thing. And as I say, either I had seen them just before, which would have only been a week or so before. I thought they were absolutely fabulous, but where I saw them was at this dingy club in Chinatown called Checkers, which had fallen from grace. I mean, back in the sort of 60s, I think, or early 60s, Shirley Bassey and Sammy Davis used to play there, but it had kind of dropped in its sort of, classic...
Calibre.
Yeah, calibre, thank you, Anyway, I went there, and there was, I often say there was 2 men and a dog, or 3 men and a dog, but there were actually probably more likely 3 girls or 4 girls, and a very bad disco light spinning, sending the sort of those, and the smell of stale Chinese food. Yeah. And this band came on stage, and I thought, oh, okay. And
was their sound quite different to what was actually being embraced by the world at that point?
Yeah, very much so. And I always remember the lead singer turned his back on the audience, and I remember my initial reaction was, "That's not real good, mate." But then he opened up his voice, and I went, "Whoa, this is I was like blown away by his voice. It was so unique. It reminded me of Stevie Winwood from the Spencer Davis Group, which were a very similar age. I think he was only about 18 at the time, might have even been a bit younger than that. And then the other part of it was, the guitarist, apart from being a great guitarist, he suddenly sang, and he's got this amazing voice.
So it really struck you there was something
absolutely,
there.
And the rhythm section.
So you gave them better than a pass on that foolscap piece of paper?
I thought they were phenomenal, and but then you leave the place because there's 3 people dancing, seemingly not interested in them, and I was like, what? Where's... when you were in London, you would hear about these things, and they're the latest band, and you'd go down to the Marquee Club, and they'd be lined up down the street. Now, they hadn't even sold a record yet; they hadn't been signed, but everybody was talking about them, But that didn't seem to occur in
Here we are in little downtown Chinatown, in Checkers.
Yeah, and Where's the
Where's the
punter?
crowd?
Where's the record company people? Where are the scribes? Where are the journos? You know.
So I think what you're really sort of addressing here too is that, you know, your acuity, in a sense, to pick up, because it didn't have all of that in the bubble, but you were actually able to sort of really identify that raw talent, and there is a real something here.
Also, the thing is, and I often think this, I've never really said it too much, but I probably said it a few times. I wonder if I'd grown up in Australia and, you know, during that, and not gone overseas, whether I would recognise that talent, or whether I would be caught up in the kind of what was happening in Australia at the time. I had a different perspective, and I always remember going to the agent, Chris Murphy, who in the end result, Chris ended up managing NXS and was very successful.
Yes.
And he gave me a job, funnily enough. And I always remember him saying to me, yeah, they're a great band, they're good. They're a good band, I think was probably more the case, but they'll never be bigger than Kevin Borich. And I love Kevin Borich, but, you know, and at the time it was actually quite relevant. You know, Cold Chisel were getting like $100 or $90, and Kevin was getting $1,200 for a gig. So there was, you know, from that perspective. But yeah, I could see something that I guess most people didn't, except I will say there was a publisher called John Brommel, who's no longer with us. He could see it, and he chased Don Walker to sign a publishing deal, and he was pestering me over this is how Cold Chisel was signed, actually. He was pestering me over over signing Don, and I said, mate, there is no point in signing Don if you don't have a way of making money by publishing a song. In other words, if it's not released as a music, what are you going to get? You know, you're not going to get anything else at playing at the Dog and Duck Hotel, you know. Yeah. So he had an in with the A&R guy at Warner Music, and who actually had seen the band on a number of occasions and actually thought they were really good, but probably was holding back the same way because it kind of wasn't fitting with what was going on at the time. It was
going to be a bit of a risk to take it on.
Yeah, and they got together, and basically what transpired was that Don would sign if we could get a record deal. And they got together and they came up with this ruse, and it's true. And because they had presented it, or the Warner Brothers guy, A&R guy, had presented it to his bosses, and they were kind of like, oh, I don't know. They were sketchy about the manager. Who is this guy? Because, you know, he doesn't, I don't know, he just came back from England and all this kind of thing. So they came up with this ruse that Peter Ricks, who at the time managed Marsha Hines, John English, Hush, you know, he had, had a real rep. He was actually going to manage the band, and Rod Willis was going to be his underling and just do the day-to-day stuff. The reality of the situation is Peter Ricks, who's still a very close friend of mine, knew nothing about this. So Warner's, the brass said, oh, okay, if Ricks is going to be involved, we'll give this guy, this band a go.
So it was very useful to have him, in on the roost because...
Yeah, but he didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
For years
None the wiser.
For years afterwards, he never knew anything about it, you know.
Your rise to being their manager, all those pieces of the puzzle kind of came together.
Well, they did come together, yeah.
And your sheer determination
But yeah, I mean, I was still there pushing. If I hadn't probably put the stipulation of, if you want the band, if you want Don's signature, you need to pull a record deal, and we need a record deal. There's no point in having it.
So you had a real business acuity too.
Well, yeah, you play the cards that are in front of you. I also went to work at Chris Murphy's agency, and which provided me with more than the $50 that I had in my pocket, so to speak. He gave me a job as a, what did you call it? Basically, I was just helping out in there. But what it provided for me was an opportunity that when they were, Blackstone RSL would call and they would want, Dragon or whatever, let's put it, whatever name, we're just pulling names out of the hat. I would be going, Cold Chisel as support. So I was getting them more and more supports by being in there. Also, I got really friendly with Chris. We really hit it off and whatever. And I remember talking to him about why aren't you using all of your leverage with all of these young support bands that are out there? And they were the newer ones that were coming along in similar bands to Cold Chisel and that kind of thing, like the Rose Tattoos and the
similar genre?
Sort of, but they were the kind of,
rock Aussie?
They were more what would become known as the pub bands as such, Why aren't we putting them on underneath these big bands? And he said to me, why don't you work within us and you'll have this little separate agency and you work with these bands and get them, on under as
Make
support bands.
Yep.
So I ended up with these bands. One was called Midnight Oil. One was called
Little known bird.
Yeah. One was called Big Swifty, which became the Radiators.
Oh yeah.
One was basically Nick Cave. Yeah. One was I can't remember the others. There was a number of them, but
yes,
and I had
and they were household names, but then and I still remember them all. Yep.
Yeah. So I would then every time the agent, because there was other agents, bigger agents, I was just the schlepper, so to speak. I would go. Put the oils on, or put Big Swifty on, or whatever like that, and that's how
it all came about.
And then, as time went on, Cold Chisel started to build on their own, and a crowd started to happen and whatever. And I was a bit concerned about the control that the agents had. They seemed to be the major driving force. The managers were there, but they were really at the under the thumb of the agents, who were determined that they played there and played there. And I ran into a guy called John Woodruff, who managed another band out of Adelaide called the Angels. And I said to him, my concerns about it's really hard to put properly manage these bands, not have them playing in the same gig, because that was the easiest way of making money. I wanted to
have a little bit more control.
I wanted more control over it,
and exposure for them,
and more exposure, more the marketing of it. So we weren't just playing in one pub, or one or two or three pubs. I wanted to be able to play in Newcastle, in Wollongong, out in the bush, and all that sort of thing.
Because you teamed up with this chap,
that's right.
didn't you?
So what happened? He said to me, once you come over to our place, and he's got a partner, a guy that was living with him called Ray Hearn, and Ray managed this little band that was just sort of starting up, called Flowers, and Flowers became Ice House. And we formed. We got together, and we were going to just form a management company, but we realised that if we didn't have the power to run the gigs, to be able to determine the gigs and book the gigs ourselves, it would be ineffective. So we ended up forming not only a management company but a booking agency together, and that's how.
Was that quite unique in the time?
Very unique.
How did you come up with the name? Tell us the name.
The name was Dirty Pool.
Who came up with the name?
Excuse me. Actually, Ray Hearn came up with the name. Yes, it's. I can't even remember what. I mean, it was a good name.
Is it a story you can tell on radio?
No, I can't.
Just maybe not.
No, I think it was just that. Probably if I spoke to him, he'd say, it was a name of a book or something that he'd read or something, but,
Nothing deep and meaningful?
No, I don't think so. It's funny because when you ask me that, I kind of go, yeah, that's a good point. How did we come up with Dirty Pool?
You'll have to go and give him a phone call. Let's get him on the line now.
He's in Spain. He lives in Spain now.
Okay, well, we won't wake him up. Well, fascinating, loving this story. You're here on Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7, 90.3, and we're here talking with Rod Willis, manager for 32 years for Cold Chisel, in amongst loads of other things that he's accomplished in his amazing life. You're here on The Grit Diaries with Rod Willis on Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7 and 90.3, and we're now in our final part of our discussion today, and we're going to unpack what your nuggets of wisdom has been as you now look back. He's just a smidge over 40 years old, and well, let's put it this way: he's got grandchildren now.
Six
grandchildren. Hello to all the beautiful grandchildren out of Rod's.
They're wrecking the house at the moment.
Oh, what a crazy life your granddad's had. And so I guess looking back now, Rod, when you look at those crazy times, those early times, if someone was listening to our discussion today, our conversation, and was in the music industry and really was wanting to really do something with their music, what would you offer them in terms of their mindset, their determination, who to listen to?
I think the first thing is don't listen to everything that's around you out there. In other words, what is popular at the moment? What is the sort of... I mean, one of the things that I find kind of strange, and it does happen quite a lot, is that a lot of the bands that are quite successful here find it very, very difficult to be successful overseas. And I get asked this a bit. They go, why didn't they break it? Well, there's a lot of other reasons for that. But quite often the bands that break through are the ones you think, well, how did that happen? Mm. And one of the things that people have to remember, if you sound like a band that's successful out of America, why would an American record company want to sign you? Because they've already got one. And in fact, they've probably got possibly 100 of them. They got one in Chicago, they got one in Detroit, they are looking for something that's unique. And so originality is what it's all about. Mm. And then being original is believing in yourself as well, that because it's very easy to sort of mold yourself along the way of a band that's successful, but you're never really going to get anywhere by doing that. That's just copying something or being... There's nothing wrong with being influenced, but what successful record companies and that are looking for is uniqueness. Now, I know there'll be probably people who say, oh, yeah, but, what about all these pop, Rihanna and all those sort of things? Well, they are unique in their own way. But it is a difficult game. There's, excuse me.
And what I actually, for a lay person, myself, in this whole space that you exist in, is the things that I've really cottoned onto is some of these artists is their sheer determination, which is what you have as well, and belief in themselves. And they were the ones that were, being a bit naughty and sort of, going up to the gates of these people and say, here's my CD, here's my tape deck, here's my whatever, and they just didn't give up, or they were continuously out there performing no matter what. They were taking any gig that they could possibly get. They were taking every single opportunity, and it wasn't necessarily a desperation. It was because they needed an outlet for their gift, their craft, is kind of what, for me as a layperson, hearing what they were doing. They were ringing producers, or they were ringing key people, and to the point where of annoyance that eventually they got a foot in the door. And from my perspective, I would think and reality is it's not going to pop for everybody.
No.
But are you going to give it your best shot?
What one of the things that I find is a lot of the bands out there think the only way they're going to be successful is, first of all, they have to have a manager. Well, you don't. Like just going back to Cold Chisel. If I'd picked Billy Dong and the Dingers instead of Cold Chisel, Billy Dong and the Dingers probably wouldn't have worked. But Cold Chisel had the goods, and being able to recognise those goods. That's what a good manager's about, being able to recognise whether you've got something there, and then, believing in that and being willing to go to the extreme to get that through to the people that are going to give you that sort of momentum that to get to the public and who buy records or go to shows or whatever. But there's no shortcut to this thing. And it's a bit hard trying to describe uniqueness. All I can sort of say about that is that to try and be original, not being led and being part of that pack as such. And I learnt that very much in America. You talk to the A&R guys, and I knew a lot of really famous A&R guys over there.
What's an A&R?
A&R is artisan repertoire. They're the guys that sign the bands.
Okay.
And in America, it's a huge business. That they might be domiciled in Los Angeles or New York, but they have people out there in all over America. I'm trying to remember what they used to call them. But anyway, these guys they're spotters. Basically, that's what they are. They're called spotters, you know. And they'd see something at the Palisades Hotel, pub or whatever it may be in San Bernardino or something, and they would say they would ring the A&R guy and they would pester him, you've got to hear this band. And that's how they work. Right. Because America is so big. The bit difference here in Australia because it's really, you've got the main cities as such, and everybody tends to congregate there. In America, you've got, so many cities and whatever.
So being original
is there are people that are probably original and it'll never work. But there is no point following the pack. I've never seen it work. I've never seen you've got to have some sort of uniqueness about you, and that to me is the main thing. And I find it a bit disturbing nowadays that there are there is lots of young bands out there that are trying to be original and doing, but there is also a lot of young bands that I know that I see that are just acquiescing to playing cover bands, and that's not building your art. And I know they've got to survive, but that's the name of the game. It's not supposed to be easy.
Yeah,
it's never going to be easy.
Yeah. And would you say as well, and I'm curious, is it being very clear about what their intention is as to what they actually want to create, what they want to achieve? Because some people are absolutely just happy just playing at the local club.
Yes.
Some people are going for, so I really want to be on this stage and I want to be known around the world. So kind of being clear, do you find that that's something that's important?
Well, I think,
Or are they I'm just going to splat it all out on the wall and just see what happens?
You know what the most important thing is? Songs. It's what it's all about. Everybody forgets, not everybody, a lot of people forget that it's songs that work. Who would predict Ed Sheeran? I mean, who's predicting him? I mean, I didn't.
I don't even think
Yeah.
Ed Sheeran predicted Ed Sheeran.
No, exactly. 150 million albums he sold. I mean, it's crazy, you know. And it's easy to sort of say, what is he? Oh, he's a guy. He's a singer-songwriter with a guitar. Now, if you'd said that before Ed Sheeran, maybe we'd go, yeah, sure, mate. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I mean, but it's unique.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is the songs. When you see bands like Cold Chisel, Icehouse, you know, the Angels, it's the songs. That's what maintains. That's what gives them that legendary status. Is the songs. Yeah, there's one-hit wonders and whatever, but you know, it's the songs that are most important.
Wow, I think that is the key piece here.
It is. It is
to
the
really
key.
go back to the core of what it's all about.
I had a guy say to me just recently, Rod, music is great. And I go, yeah, music is great. But songs, that's what it's all about. It's the songs. And when you think about it, it's that simplistic.
So simple.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you know, to me, get down there and write songs, you know. In the end result, the songwriters make more money than most artists anyway. Or, you know, in bands, it's usually the songwriter that's making the money, sadly in ways, but sometimes they spread it around, but most of the time, you know, it's the songwriter. That's
yes,
because he's not only getting the record royalties, he's getting the publishing royalties as well. You know?
There's a pro tip for you guys. If you want to be in the dough, you go for the the songwriting. Rod, this has been really special. Thank you so much for coming on today. And I know that this will be invaluable for particularly the up-and-coming bands and the artists that are really trying to make it in the business and just trying to carve out what they actually want to create. But just going back, and I think that's the core essence of what we've spoken about today in Grit to Grace is remembering. Don't forget the songs. Just remember how important it is to focus on that originality and give it a really good crack.
That's it. Go for it.
Yeah.
Don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
You know?
And as I say, Rod's got a great book out, Ringside. You know, obviously, you know, we're only unpacking just a very, very small segment of Rod's incredible, crazy life. And there's so much in there for...
1,000 stories on the Naked City.
Oh, I bet.
And this has been one of them.
Oh, I love it. We're here on Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7 and 90.3. Thank you so much for being part of the show today. And Cheap Wine, why are we choosing this one as the final?
This is from East, which was the big breakthrough album. 2 albums, you know, Cold Chisel and then Breakfast at Sweethearts. And then I think today Don would agree that he purposely went out to write a pop album or write pop songs as such. It's not necessarily my most favourite song, but it's a significant...
We all know it.
Exactly. Everybody can sing it. Everybody can joke about...
We all drank that cheap wine.
Yeah, cheap wine.
Not a 3-day growth, though, for the ladies.
Yeah.
Well, I hope not. Thanks so much for being here today, Rod.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks for joining Mon and Maz on Grit Diaries, where we have heard stories from grit to grace. We so enjoyed sharing some time with you today, and we hope that from the stories and ideas that we shared today, you will go out and make big things grow.
Australia, the lucky country. We've got meat pies. We've got the world's best beer. But most importantly, top of the list, we've got Radio Northern Beaches 88.7, 90.3. Now hitting the entire world on www.rnb.org.au.